The metaverse is emerging as the next big technology platform and promises to be the next frontier for human experiences on the internet. Into the Metaverse covers companies, technologies, and trends that are bringing these promises to life. Join creator and host Jonathan Ross-Friedman, founder and CEO of Super Social, as he interviews the brilliant minds that are building, shaping, and investing in the Metaverse.
Welcome to Into the Metaverse. I'm Yon, and joining me today is Aiden Slavin, who leads the governance task force at the World Economic Forum's Metaverse Initiative, of which I have the honor to be a member of. Aiden also led the Crypto Impact and Sustainability Accelerator at the World Economic Forum, and prior to that, he was a consultant for the Oxford Center for Technology and Development. For a bit of background, the World Economic Forum recently released fascinating reports about the Metaverse, specifically about its governance and social implications, and we're thrilled to be speaking with them in depth about this new frontier. This is part two. Part one, we spoke with Connie. So for part two, Aiden, super excited to have you on the podcast.
Likewise, so excited to be here, Jan. Really appreciate the invitation.
So let's jump straight right to my first favorite question, which I really ask all of our guests, and really it's part of this fortunate position that I have to speak with many brilliant minds to help build a consensus around this whole metaverse concept, which, I'm a big proponent of and live within every day. But Aiden, to you, for the work you do, how do you think about what is the metaverse?
Yeah. So this is obviously, a core part of the initiative that you all have been a part of, Jan, and that we really set as our primary goal here. The initiative at the forum has a longer title than it's often referred to as. So we call it the Defining and Building the Metaverse Initiative. And that first part is really critical because we think that one of the exciting things about working on this technology at this time is we don't have a fully baked version of the metaverse or, metaverses. We have some virtual worlds that we can look to for great examples and sort of early data points on where these technologies and user experiences are heading. But we think that, defining the metaverse is a super critical part of our deliverable. The way that we've approached it to date, and this is going to be true for the rest of our initiative, is we have a very broad brush approach to how we think about the metaverse. We're simply thinking about it as this is the next iteration of the internet. So if you can imagine, the development of Web 2, the current internet, social media, these were all sort of part and parcel of the current internet that we've all been living with for the past, 10, 20 plus years. We see the metaverse as, bringing a greater sense of presence, immersion, interactivity to that experience, but we're not trying to be prescriptive in the way that we speak about it. And so what we think about is we are helping to define some of the governance frameworks, standards, and norms when it comes to building this next version of the internet.
And you started to touch upon the governance piece. And so understandably, there is a very big emphasis on privacy and security for all participants in this growing community in the next iteration of the internet. And so a key question I have is, how do you see the management of data privacy evolving as participation and business access into this next frontier starting to take shape and form?
Yeah, it is such a critical question. And I think that it really is so crucial because we have seen that there were many great innovations in the development of Web 2 and the current day internet. There were also a lot of unintended consequences. And many of that stemmed from, a lack of really rigorously enforced law, standards and norms around privacy and data processing in the current internet. And so as we think about this next iteration of digital interaction, digital spaces, we want to be sure that we put privacy considerations front and center. And the reason for that is we've seen these breakdowns in trust from users and platforms when they're on the internet today. And we see privacy and safety as some of those key sort of building blocks of trust, because ultimately both businesses, users, governments, they all want to create this environment where these platforms are trustworthy, where the experiences and interactions that people are having on them are trusted. And so we've placed privacy and safety really at the center, of our work. We do think that the metaverse poses some net new privacy and safety risks. There is a risk of increasing amounts of data collection and different types of data collection than we've seen in the past. Of particular concern here is, of course, body-based data. So headsets tracking eye movement, body movement, these are things that can reveal highly sensitive data, particularly biometric data. And through inferred data patterns, even the way that an avatar navigates a space you can pretty reliably reveal really important, and in some cases, really essential components about an individual's identity.
I want to ask for a second. Because, intuitively, I think everyone understands this is an issue. But I want to ask the basic question, why is that a problem? Why do you think it's a problem that companies may have that type of data?
Yeah. So I think that it really becomes a problem when you think about that trust issue, right? And so we've seen in Web 2 what happens when you have data leakage, when you have cyber theft, identity theft. These are all issues that we all know from our interactions with the current day internet. And you could imagine those issues growing exponentially in terms of their potential consequence and harm in a metaverse environment where that data becomes even more sensitive. So if you can imagine data that is even more valuable and vulnerable than the data you put, for instance, on social media or that you email across the internet, this body-based data is so revealing because with just a few data points, you can infer things like someone's health status, their identity, the way that they are going to behave in the future in these environments. There's a predictive component, that can be used when you have that quality of data. At the same time, though, I don't only want to speak about the negatives of the, privacy concerns that we have here in the metaverse, because we also think that as data collection and processing evolves, there's going to be really exciting opportunities here for enhanced personalization, greater interactivity in these digital spaces. And also, we think that this data could be used to enhance safety and security through things like gating functions. So it's a dual use kind of situation. There's, a double-edged sword here. But definitely, this is one of the issues we're really focused on in the initiative.
Yeah, and I think that what's also important in my mind is that there is a cross-collaboration, not just between organizations that are private, but also cross-collaborations between public sector and private sector, large companies, early stage, emerging companies, in order to make sure that not only the big business interests are represented, even though they understand the risks, but I think a lot of I like you kind of finished on a positive note, which is what are the opportunities? What are those things that are actually going to be meaningful for people? And I think a lot of these can and likely will be designed by emerging players and not just big business. And so I want to switch gears and talk briefly about a couple of things that I've seen in the report that you're releasing this week. What do privacy by design and safety by design in the metaverse mean for those who are less familiar with the terms?
Yeah, absolutely. So, privacy by design, safety by design, we use that phrase by design several times throughout the paper. And I think you'll see that language repeated across, many of the different initiatives that we have at the forum. They can be slightly confusing, but I think that like our definition of the metaverse, by that, we really just mean that these privacy and safety considerations are baked into the development of the technology itself. So you can think about a platform developing a metaverse environment. They may have a principle of wanting to uphold a user's privacy, but they may make certain choices in the engineering process that contradicts that goal of building privacy and building trust. And so when we talk about privacy and safety by design, what we really mean is that these core tenets are sort of baked into the development, processing, and then ultimate use of these technologies. And that's really what we see as critical here is that, with this initiative, we're trying to get industry, government, civil society, academia, all on the same page in terms of what we mean by that and how they can be building those products in a privacy and safety preserving fashion.
So when I started Super Social over 3 years ago to focus on building virtual worlds for the next frontier of the internet, very early, very quickly, I realized that no one knows what I'm talking about. And not only no one knows what I'm talking about, people have thousands of different terms and ideas about what the metaverse. And then the whole hype began when Mark Zuckerberg changed Facebook's names to Meta, which took 100x the lack of clarity and uncertainty of what it is. And what bothered me the most was that suddenly the light turned on the metaverse term and concept, but it was in the context of a VR device. So suddenly many people thought, oh, the metaverse is what you access through a VR device. And not only that, the metaverse is something that Meta is building. And that's kind of prompted me to start Into the Metaverse, the podcast, so we can really create an environment and content that helps people understand what it is and what it means for themselves and for the world. And so tapping into that, a question I have for you is, how do you envision through the initiative of the forum, how do you envision organizations and maybe the public at large establishing and promoting and understanding metaverse literacy and what it actually means and what it could mean for them?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really great question. So I think that the key point here is that metaverse literacy is building on a greater and more broad-based need for digital literacy in general, right? Because I think that you're pointing to one of the central concerns here, which is that the metaverse as a term, as a concept, as an idea, can be co-opted or, can be used by industry players, government players to mean many, many different things. And because we as the forum are thinking about the metaverse as kind of the next iteration of digital experiences, the next iteration of the internet, we don't want to align the term too closely with any individual virtual world. Instead, we want to be talking about this in the same way that we currently talk about the internet, which is, of course, this global network that's bigger than any one player, industry, or government. And so that is a key component of metaverse literacy at this stage, because we are currently in the kind of education and term defining stage of the development of this technology. But we also think that these literacy questions are going to become really interesting, thorny, and crucial as the metaverse develops. So to give you a specific example, you talked about headsets and how they have become, so aligned with people's thinking about the metaverse. We do think that there's really a role for VR and headsets to play in the future of this technology. And headsets are interesting because they're going to present such a different set of interface opportunities and challenges for users. When I logged on to do this podcast, right, I opened my laptop, I pulled up a browser. These are things that I've been doing, since I was a kid. I have a great familiarity with them. They don't have the quality of immersiveness that a metaverse environment ultimately will. And a headset is going to create these challenges of kind of spatial awareness during use. These are issues that we haven't yet, as a general public, dealt with when we come to digital technologies. And so, for instance, giving people a greater sense of how to modulate their spatial awareness when they're using a headset, when they're in a metaverse environment, that's just one component of this metaverse literacy need that we see. And beyond that, we also see needs to address the kind of digital divide more broadly, because, of course, the metaverse is not going to be a panacea for many of the issues that we're seeing already in Web 2.
And I think another piece of literacy is the fact that what's already happening, you have about, 66 million daily active users on a platform like Roblox, where people come from 200 countries around the world. And in many cases, parents of those young people don't even know what necessarily they do, what are the dangers of this platform, but also what are the opportunities of socialization, expression, creativity. Many people still think about platforms like Roblox, Fortnite, Minecraft as purely video games. And I think the definition of video games is really, really evolving. And so I have a question, which is, how do the initiative and the forum approaches how that relationship between young people, between older generations, is going to be addressed as the metaverse become kind of the next internet? And also, if we look historically, when we started using Facebook in 2005, 2006, really Facebook was a tool for young people, right? Anyone kind of between age 15 and 25 was pretty much the core audience of Facebook. Now, my mother, God bless her, she's like a power user of Facebook. I don't even use Facebook at all. And so it kind of took like 10, 15 years until an older generation realized what that modality and social network enable. Are we looking at a similar trajectory with metaverse and virtual worlds, or are you guys looking at it in a different way?
It's such an interesting question, Yon, and I think that the jury's still out on how this is going to develop. But the way that we see it is, our role is really to, as I say, create that platform for collaboration, present those frameworks, those standards and norms. And so we try and take as broad-based an approach as possible and really look across the generations and the age groups. The use cases that you just mentioned around children and older folks using the metaverse, those are two that are particularly interesting, and I think that they're ones that we are constantly thinking about as an initiative and as a working group. To give you an example, in our current paper, which is going to launch next week, we actually have a whole section where we spotlight child safety and privacy considerations, because we think that children's use of the metaverse, we're already seeing it in platforms like Roblox. We expect it only to grow. This poses really interesting and exciting opportunities around education opportunities, socialization, self-expression. When in the history of the world has a child been able to log online and, present themselves to others as a dragon, or in some other form that they feel that they identify with? That's a great opportunity. At the same time, we also see there to be need to think about, how do you create those privacy and safety ways that are thoughtful for children, that allow them to access these environments and have that freedom, but also that, respects that in many cases their parents or guardians, do need to have a say in the types of environments that they are accessing. And so we've thought through with our working group certain, processes that platforms can employ, things like recourse and redress mechanisms for children. So when something goes wrong, those redress mechanisms are there for children to access, and they're accessible in an easy to use fashion for kids, as well as providing sort of ongoing notifications to parents or guardians as children, walk into different virtual worlds. Because the last thing that we want is, again, to reproduce many of the challenges that we see in Web 2 with, kids getting exposed to harmful content. We really want to be creative in the way that we're thinking about that tension between free access and safe access.
Yeah, that's a great point. And look, I think realistically, there's always going to be bad players, bad actors that take advantage of these technologies. I think with a world and an internet that has a wider sense of presence, wider sense of anonymity, it's going to be ever more challenging, which I think will require collaboration between companies, between public sector, between players like the World Economic Forum, and also the public itself. I think people will need to be in a position where they vote with their clicks, and walk away from platforms that they believe is going to be intrusive and harmful to young people. I want to switch gear and talk about the very exciting topic of AI. So one of the things I'm hearing from people sometimes when I talk to them about the metaverse, like, Yon, metaverse is like yesterday, and everyone is now on like generative AI. I'm like, guys, what are you talking about? This whole thing is together. You can't disconnect these decentralized technologies, metaverse and virtual world, generative AI. They all together define what is the next era of the internet. And so what do you believe the role that AI will play in the expansion of the metaverse, in the popularization of it, in the realization of it? And how do you think that should be governed in the context of the internet, but also specifically when we talk about popularizing and making the metaverse as big as it can be?
Yeah. So this is I really do appreciate that question, because we are right in the midst of the grand AI hype cycle. And as someone who comes from, crypto and Web3, I have lived through and sort of seen the rise and fall in these news attention grabbing, pieces. And I think that's, it's great that AI, which is an incredible and I think potentially transformative technology, is receiving that attention. There's been so much work over decades from the AI community to make some of those systems and algorithms a reality. So that's all fantastic to see. Like you said, Jan, my colleague Connie, who I know you just had on the podcast, has a great metaphor for the development of the metaverse, which is that, the metaverse, we have these underlying technologies, whether that's blockchain and cryptocurrencies or AI, or virtual reality technologies. They're sort of like horses that are, all pulling a carriage together. And at any moment, one of those horses could jump out to the front and gather all the attention. That's clearly what we're seeing happening with AI at the moment. And some of that's well-deserved, because I think that, AI is going to be crucial to the development of the metaverse, particularly generative AI. So when we think about, how you actually create these virtual worlds in an immersive and, an environment with verisimilitude, the ability to actually get people to think that, oh, I'm walking around this environment and it is a new reality. We need generative AI to be able to do that, because, creating those worlds without it is just so time and resource intensive. And for the metaverse to really take off, generative AI is going to be a crucial sort of building block to achieving that. But poses such risks, because to go back to your earlier question about privacy and safety by design, building and then running these AI algorithms, what's so great is that they can create all of these worlds, but if they're not built with these privacy by design, safety by design principles embedded into the code itself, then we risk a situation where an AI could go out and create potentially exponentially negative consequences as it builds virtual world after virtual world without these privacy and safety considerations baked in. So with AI, it's like taking the privacy and safety conversation, to a whole nother level where we need to think really thoughtfully about how these systems are governed. And if I could just shamelessly plug another forum initiative at the moment that just launched, really exciting, called the AI Governance Initiative. That's how we are going to be thinking through many of these issues, and that will then feed into the work that we're doing on Metaverse as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. And I think that it's definitely important that, and I know that that's how the World Economic Forum approaches this with this initiative, which is it has to be sort of a cross collaboration. In my mind is kind of, these three forces are really integrated to one another, right? How do we enable a more egalitarian user-owned internet with using decentralized technologies, and what does that mean for economy, for opportunity, for safety, and so on and so forth. On the other end, we have this virtual world, the kind of the next interface of what the internet is going to feel like, look like, already today, but also with these new devices like MetaQuest, Fusion Pro. I'm sure there's going to be a wide array of different technologies that are embedded in new generation devices. The iPhone continues to be ever more relevant as a key form factor through which we access interactive media and content. And then lastly, AI, which is suddenly kind of becoming that sort of foundational technology, which everyone thought it would be, but, making sure that we can distinguish between the hype and what's real, just like we've been through with NFTs and blockchain and then virtual world and metaverse and so on and so forth. And they are all connected together to define what is this next iteration of the internet, which is why it's so great that you guys have all of these initiatives running in multiple and in parallel. How do you envision the relationship between key thought leaders in the space, authors, theorists, policymakers, product designers, builders, companies, industry regulators, as you guys are bringing the pieces together to ensure that the way the metaverse and these next iteration of the internet evolves in the coming years is actually be happening in the most meaningful way, and especially given the just incredible access that you, as the World Economic Forum, has to decision makers and business leaders?
Yeah, it's such a great question, and I think that it really gets at the essence of the forum. We are an organization that exists to create these kind of convenings and this sort of collaboration on issues that are too large for any single actor, be it a government or a massive, industry player, to solve on their own. And so that's core to kind of our method here and the way that we approach all of these topics. At the same time, like we've been talking about this whole conversation, we are super early in the development of the metaverse and in the development of these underlying technologies. And we believe that we have a role to play as a community, industry, government, civil society, et cetera, in setting those initial frameworks, standards, and norms. But our success is only going to come if those key stakeholders then act upon the recommendations that this community is making. And so I think we are in the standards and norms and sort of framework building era of this next version of the internet. And, the success is really going to come if we can really change hearts and minds about these important values of privacy, safety, governance, et cetera, and if they really take it and run with it. So I am hopeful that we can make that happen in a way that's much better than has happened in the previous era of the internet. And, we're going to keep working to that end.
And I think that another piece that in my mind is really important is how do we make sure that a lot of those principles and recommendations that initiatives like the World Economic Forum is talking about and putting together, what are the things that can also be translated to actual algorithms and software that is being built? Because at the end of the day, there is so much that we can do if things are not developed and deployed inside actual products, inside actual platforms. And I think the key there is, and I don't know the answer to that, but I'm curious if you have a point of view, which is how do we take these aspirations, these amazing principles that we have and actually deploy them to software, right? Everyone likes to use the Google example of they had these principles, do no evil, right? Or don't be evil. And my question is like, if we use that, how do you take don't be evil and translate that to an actual software development principle? You know what I'm saying?
So my answer on this is I don't think you can. I think that there's a great development in privacy enhancing technologies like the ones that you're alluding to, and we can certainly advocate that those be built into these virtual worlds, and that's crucial. But at the same time, evil, good, questions of morality, those are far too complex to be able to reduce to a set of rules and, software and code. And so I think the reality is governance is here to stay. Even as the metaverse gets into maturity and beyond, we are still going to be faced with these thorny questions of governance. Of that, I am certain. And it's going to mean that this collaboration is an ongoing necessity, and hopefully something we can draw some really great objectives out of.
I mean, the truth is that technology is people. People build technology. Technology is not something that lands from the sky, parachuted into Earth. Technology is people, and people are complex, and technology will continue to be complex. And that's why I agree with you. I don't think you can take values and principles and translate them into software. Exactly. And definitely, I don't think the right thing is going to be to go to ChatGPT and say, here is my value. Can you please write the code that translate that into a software product?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. I couldn't agree more.
Aiden, before we wrap up, what's the thing you're most excited about for the next 12 months?
So we are really excited because we have the launch of this privacy and safety paper and the social implications paper that you've been referencing. And thank you for that. After that, we're going to turn our working group's attention over to metaverse identity. And this is an area that has its own set of thorny challenges and really exciting opportunities around representation, free expression. But also, we need to work out, again, some fundamental issues that were never solved in Web 2 around digital ID, authentication, control over data for users. So that's what I'm really excited to dive into next, because the way that we've structured this is really a series of these big challenges that we're trying to tackle as a community. And I think once we get through identity, we're going to have made a lot of progress to that end.
I'm really excited about that particular pillar, because I believe that we are moving into a world where people are already and will in growing numbers care as much about their virtual identity as they do about their physical one. And at some point, there are going to be a complete merge of those things. Even though I believe in the metaverse and virtual world, we can have multiple identities, but they can always be anchored into who we are as people, as humans. And I want to make sure that there aren't these silos. Oh, this is physical, this is virtual. I think they need to be, but what does that mean that these things are connected? These are huge questions.
It is so fascinating. I mean, one thing that is really interesting, we've seen some great researchers in the community who have done these studies on the creation of false memories, for instance, that when you have, children in metaverse environments, if they do a task or if they, perform some kind of action in that environment, they can then leave the environment and remember it as if it was something that actually happened to them. And so I think, Yon, that just goes to your point, which is that we can't really separate the physical from the digital. These are going to have, these virtual world interactions are going to have really crucial implications for people's sense of identity and self. And so that's why we see identity as equally, important as privacy and safety and trust and well-being here.
100%. Aiden, thank you so much for being with me today. It's been a fascinating conversation, and we're going to make sure that people can access the papers and stay tuned for more to come from the initiative.
Awesome. Thanks, Yon. That was a pleasure. So really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Into the Metaverse. We hope you learned a lot and explored new aspects of the metaverse.